Hi, everyone. So today we are going to be talking about public policy in Texas. Okay, so first off, what is public opinion and how does that roll into all of this? All right. It's the collective attitudes, beliefs, and preferences of the general population on various issues, policies, or candidates. And it represents the aggregate views of individuals within a society or community, and it can influence political decisions, policymaking, and social norms. Now, public opinion is typically measured through surveys, polling, and different studies. Now, why is public opinion important? Well, number one, it legitimizes government. Okay, so the more people with a favorable opinion of our leaders, the more legitimacy those leaders have in the actions that they take. It also guides policy making throughout the state and the country. It encourages citizen participation. That means elections and talking to our representatives in Austin or in the federal government. It maintains democratic health and it shapes our social norms, right? The way that we feel about things generally changes the things that we're willing to accept inside of society. Some of those things have changed dramatically in a short amount of time. Some of them changed over long spans of time. But the more comfortable we become with different things, the more likely our leaders are to accept those and bring those into policy. We can look at something simple, which we look at as relatively normal now, which is gay marriage. That was completely illegal in the state of Texas for a very long time, and now it's kind of a norm throughout the state. We also have things like marijuana legalization. The majority of Texans actually push for that now. Cumulatively, if you look at for just medical purposes, it's around 70%, slightly less if you look for just regular use, but there is still a large uptick in Texans pushing for that now as well. Now, the historical influence of public opinion in Texas. We were kind of known for frontier justice and gun rights. Early Texas culture emphasizes individual protections and frontier justice. In other words, you could get there before the cops in early Texas history. Now, tough on crime policies are more recent. Those came into effect in the state of Texas between the 80s and the 90s, pushing for strong public support and harsher sentencing laws, as well as a stronger use of the death penalty. Now, currently, things that we are looking at that keep coming around, and we'll talk about this a little bit later on, is education and curriculum control. Now, those modern influence, we have school choice and parental rights. Those things have started to go through just recently. Immigration and border security has been something that has been discussed in Texas for a very long time, but we have gotten to the point now where a few years ago, we actually even had a standoff between the National Guard in Texas and Border Patrol agents down on our southern border. That's something that Texas has had kind of a hardline stance on for quite a while now. Healthcare access. What has Texas done? Why are they doing the things that they're doing with healthcare? We'll cover that here in a little as well. Gun control in the state of Texas, believe it or not, it does come up. Get mixed signals on that. Generally, those go down party lines, Republicans and Democrats, things like that. Now, the theories of public opinion become important because these kind of explain the way that some people react in different situations. The first of these that we're going to talk about is the spiral of silence theory. Now, this theory suggests that individuals are less likely to express their opinions if they believe that they are in the minority. They may fear social isolation, backlash, things that lead them to remain silent and conform to the perceived majority's view. Now, over time, this can make the majority opinion appear more dominant than it actually is. In other words, because of the spiral of silence theory, you may end up in a situation where the majority opinion isn't actually the majority opinion. Now, framing theory focuses on how the media and communication present information to you. The way an issue is framed can influence public perception and opinion by highlighting certain aspects and downplaying others. For example, framing on an economic issue as a crisis versus an opportunity can lead to different public reactions and attitudes. And this is something that we see in the media, but we also see a lot repeated on social media and the different ways that we feel about what is going on in our country, not just in our state. Agenda setting theory, this one suggests that the media doesn't tell people what to think, but rather what to think about. they emphasize certain issues, and the media can shape the public's perception of their importance and influence public opinion indirectly. Now, socialization theory focuses on how individuals form opinions through social interactions and influences. Key agents of socialization include family, peers, education, of course, the media, and these influences can shape an individual's values, their belief systems, and their attitudes over time. That's why sometimes we have that idea that when someone goes to college, it may change the way that they perceive things. It's not necessarily what they're learning or even their classes, but more so they're around different people. For a lot of us, the first time that we're around large groups of people that are not our family is when we leave to go to college. Now, cognitive dissonance theory. People experience discomfort when they hold conflicting beliefs or when their beliefs are challenged by new information. So to reduce the discomfort that comes from cognitive dissonance, individuals sometimes change their opinions or reject new information and rationalize their existing beliefs. Now, groupthink is a phenomenon where the desire for harmony and conformity inside of a group can lead to irrational and dysfunctional decision-making, and group members may suppress dissenting opinions and fail to critically evaluate alternative viewpoints. This affects public opinion within that group. Now, groupthink can sometimes be dangerous. This is sometimes when we see a rally or a protest turning into a riot, things like that. It's essentially groupthink. Everyone is kind of following the herd. This isn't really something that we want to fall into because as you fall into groupthink, you kind of stop thinking for yourself. Now, the main places that this public opinion or that your opinion in general is going to be formed is first with your family, which makes sense. Those are the first people that you're going to be around, through your education, through the media that you listen to or that you watch. Depending on the news source that you watch, you're hearing the news in a completely different light. If you were to watch MSNBC versus Fox News, a lot of those stories are going to be framed in a completely different way, which will change the way, if you don't listen to other forms of media, that you perceive them. Okay? And then priming, which is basically just repeating something in different methods, different ways, and through different forms of media so that it changes the way that you think about those things. And that doesn't just happen with the news. This can happen even with TV shows. There's lots of different shows that have come on, even cartoons for kids, that have specific messages that over time build up. One popular when I was a kid, for example, was called Captain Planet, which taught us about saving the Earth. And it pushed a narrative of green energy and trying to clean up our environment. This is something that has actually stuck with a lot of us from that time frame that watched that. We don't just remember the cartoon, we remember the message that was given to us in that cartoon. So even outside of the media, even outside of politics, you're going to run into ways that information is going to be framed and primed in order to help push you into thinking in a different way. Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes not so much. It's really up for you to decide, but it's a good thing to be cautious and to be aware that these things do go on around us. Now, how do we gather all of this public information? Well, there's several different ways. One of those is through telephone polls. You may have gotten one of these before where they will call you and they'll ask you questions about your political affiliation, how you plan on voting, things like that. There's online surveys. This one gets really interesting because with online surveys, sometimes we can find ourselves being involved in a pool of public opinions and information without even realizing it. So we're not always talking, again, on politics, but we're talking sometimes these are things that you wouldn't even think about them being used as a form of gathering information. This would be like going on Instagram or TikTok or Facebook and seeing a poll. What kind of puppy should you have? What's your next tattoo? Things like that. You fill this out because you're bored and it seems fun, but that information goes somewhere. That's information gathering that someone somewhere is going to use to form either ad campaigns, opinions, all kinds of different things is going to come out of that information that you're just kind of giving away freely without even realizing that you're giving it out. Now, there are face-to-face interviews. Those are a little rare, but face-to-face interviews allows them to get more in-depth information from a smaller group of people. We also have mail-in surveys that come out. One of those, for example, would be the U.S. Census, where they're gathering information on specific topics. Then you have focus groups. This goes along kind of with the face-to-face interviews, where they take a small group of people and ask questions directly. Again, you don't get as much information from a large group of people, but you get more information from a smaller group of people that can be used to focus their attention on issues that they may feel are necessary to address inside of the state. Now, state institutions and their roles. So we have the Texas State Legislature. They make the laws. They control our budget. Our governor's seat that sets the agenda. They can have veto powers and executive orders. We have our court system. And then we have different state agencies. Okay, all of these different places are using this information on public opinion so that they can decide what it is that they are going to do and what kind of policies they're going to implement and to enforce. So for our elected officials, obviously the governor, lieutenant governor, the speaker of the House, our state senate, and our state representatives. And these guys are all going to use that to change the way that they think. You can even see that in some different topics that were covered over the summer session with the legislative branch, where the legislature eventually passed legislation on anti-marijuana laws inside of the state that were actually vetoed by Greg Abbott, who would later sign executive orders. So right now that's on the chopping block again. On the 31st, for example, part of that went through making any form of smokable hemp products illegal in the state. And then in November, another executive order, if it goes through, will make other forms of hemp-based cannabis illegal inside the state as well. Okay, so there are some things that come down from the federal government through mandates that we have to do inside of the state of Texas. These also, again, are generally coming through public opinion and through these polls and things like that. But let's go through a couple. We have the No Child Left Behind Act that's signed in 2001 that deals with education. Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the IDEA Act, again, dealing with education. Every Student Success Act, this is from 2015. We go a little bit further back. We have the Voters' Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. We have the American with Disabilities Act from the 1990s, the Affordable Care Act from 2010, and most recently we have the Real ID Act, which was the new driver's license that you had to get if you didn't already have one, where you got the Real ID. That one passed just last year. Now, there are theories of public opinion and the way that these things go. So let's take a look at these. We have elite theory, policy driven by small groups of wealthy and powerful actors. Then we have pluralism, that is competing interest groups balance each other out. We have incrementalism, small gradual policy changes over time. And then we have rational choice theory, where policymakers act in their own self-interest to benefit their political survival. Now, some of these are good things, some of these are bad things. When you go through these, generally you're going to find yourself thinking that one or the other is happening at all time. Rational choice theory is one that, depending on how things are going, if you don't like what's going on with your leaders, sometimes people will fall into this and they'll go, they're just doing this because it either benefits them or it benefits their party. They're not necessarily doing it because it benefits me. That's a normal thought to have. Sometimes it's true. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you're just in the dissenting, you're in the minority. But sometimes you may be in the majority looking at something and not liking the outcome. We can see that with different policies in the state of Texas as well, like our marijuana policies. The majority of Americans or Texans want it legal, at least for medical use inside of the state. But Texas state policy keeps pushing against that. So one of the ways that we get these things pushed through is through lobbying, campaign donations, and public pressure campaigns. They also have testifying and hearings inside the Texas state legislature so that they can see what the public thinks about the different bills that they are trying to pass. So what is the policymaking process in Texas, right? Well, first we have a perception of an issue. So they bring up the issue. Then how is that issue going to be framed? Okay, we frame out the problem. Then the agenda is set, and then we get to public and political pressure campaigns to try and push these things through. So who identifies these problems or these issues we want to address? Well, elected officials for one, interest groups, the public. This is why taking part in some of those surveys is so important. The media does push different agendas. They are going to play a role in this. Academics and experts, and most importantly, the person that plays a part in identifying these issues is you, the citizens of Texas. We address different issues generally through the way that we address our politicians, right? If someone's getting voted out every so many years, it's because the people aren't getting what they want. It's a way that we send a signal so that they understand that we want different policies pushed through based on our opinions that they need to follow. Okay. Now, key public policy areas in Texas. We have the Texas Education Agency, State Board of Education, and local independent school districts that all set their own things. Okay. Now, with curriculum and standards, with the TEKS, we have Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. We also have the STAR testing, and these are both things that people kind of push against to some extent. STAR testing is very stressful for the kids, for the students. STAR testing doesn't necessarily give you a full spectrum of the knowledge of the students because some people just aren't good test takers. This is something that does have pushback inside of the state. Now, staying with this idea of education, there are several things that are passed inside the state that help certain areas of education. There's also things inside the state that people tend to fight against. So we have, for example, the Robin Hood Act that's passed in Edgewood ISD versus Kirby, which requires wealthier districts to send funds to the state for redistribution to poor school districts. Now, how do we fund these school districts? Generally through property taxes. The main source of local school funding is property taxes and different bond measures that are passed by those schools. There's lots of concern on this with the raising of those taxes, with the raising of bonds, whether or not you should have to pay taxes on something that you've already paid off. There is a large pushback inside the state of Texas to do away with property taxes altogether. Now, that also comes with how do we fund those schools? If we get rid of this, how do we fund the schools? Because that's the main way that we fund them. We have a push even from Greg Abbott. He's run on this a few times as governor, that he's going to completely get rid of property taxes. The issue then becomes, how do we fund the different schools? Now, recent legislation we have is House Bill 3, that was in 2019, that increased state funding for teacher pay and early literacy programs, as well as in 2023, we have a property tax relief and a school choice debate that came up. These things are really kind of in-depth and interesting. I suggest you maybe look into those a little bit more. We're not going to go over those in their completely inside of this because it's just going to take up way too much time. Now, our current issues that we have out now, we have school voucher programs. What we've seen with those school voucher programs since they've been put in is it gives money to families to send their children to private schools. The majority of people claiming those vouchers are people that already had their children in private schools. Now, another issue we run into is debates over curriculum inside of the state of Texas. This might be CRT, sexual education, and sometimes even historical content, the way that things are being taught. We've also run into book bans inside of the state, and this mixes in with parental rights inside of education, teachers' pay and working conditions. Texas has kind of a lack of teachers. A lot of states are dealing with this. One of the reasons is there's a pay gap between how much they're getting paid, how much they have to go to school to even have that job, right? And it makes it more difficult for younger people to come into that form of work and want to stay there long term. Now, inside of schools, we've had more and more issues with mental health and school safety funding. And also, again, like I said, STAR testing reform. This is something that's been on the chopping block for quite a while. Now, healthcare policy in Texas is kind of interesting. Texas does have some programs inside of Texas that really do help the working class family, like the CHIPS program for children and things like that. There's other areas where we haven't done so well. For example, Texas turned down the expansion of Medicaid and Medicare under the Affordable Health Care Act. We're one of only 10 states that actually did that. And the oppositions were based on cost, federal dependency, and political ideologies. But the result of that was that there are millions of people inside the state that end up falling into a coverage gap where they don't qualify for the Affordable Health Care Act, but they also don't qualify for any of the other programs that are available to them. So they're kind of stuck in an uninsured gray area. Now, this isn't the majority, but this is still a lot of people throughout the state that find themselves in this predicament, which will either lead to them not being insured or sometimes even seeking out employment for the sole purpose of being able to get health insurance. Now, there are some other areas of public policy concern inside the state of Texas. For example, criminal justice policies inside the state. Do we make things harsher, right? Which laws do we change? Which laws do we feel like are unjust? Those kind of things. Immigration policy inside the state has been a big concern for a very long time. Again, environmental policies inside the state, where Texas has generally stepped away from environmental policies. We've kind of pushed against almost everything that the federal government has tried to push towards the state of Texas. And then, of course, economics and tax policies inside the state of Texas are their own kind of thing as well. We have one of the largest economies in the world, even if we were a standalone nation. So we have that going for us. But the thing with some of our energy policies is we don't really take care of them that well. Texas, for example, prides ourselves on having our own power grid. But for those of you that remember, not too many years ago, that whole power grid went down when it got too cold. So we have some issues we need to work through as a state. And the way that you can make that happen is through your opinion in public policy, okay? So your public opinion, whenever you voice that opinion to the leaders in our legislative branch or to our governor, it's their job to take those things seriously so that they can use those for a starting point whenever they're looking at making new legislation in the future. And this has been about 22 minutes. This is a quick overview. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have any questions, anything like that, feel free to reach out. And I will talk to you guys next week.